Hello and welcome to Ani's Short Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Cursed Clock. It was a brisk autumn evening on the Isle of Wight when Holly Arnold stumbled upon the antique shop she'd never noticed before. Its crooked sign creaked in the wind, the faded letters spelling out Tempest Antiquities. Something about the shop felt off, like it didn't quite belong in this century. The windows were filled with peculiar trinkets, withered books, tarnished silverware, and an ornate clock that immediately caught Holly's eye. The clock was unlike anything she had ever seen. Encased in dark mahogany and adorned with intricate carvings of twisted faces and gnarled trees, its pendulum swung with an unnatural rhythm. The hands were frozen at midnight, yet the ticking persisted, steady and hypnotic. Beneath the clock face, a brass plaque read, "Time waits for no one unless you make it." The shopkeeper, a gaunt man with sunken eyes, emerged from the shadows. His voice was gravelly, as if he hadn't spoken in years. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Holly nodded, unable to look away from the clock. "Would you like it? A rare find, and just within your means," he continued. Holly hesitated, but felt compelled to say yes. As the clock was wrapped and handed over, the shopkeeper's hand lingered on hers. "Wind it only when you truly need it," he warned. That night, back at her cottage in Ventnor, Holly set the clock on her mantel. The ticking grew louder in the stillness of her home, almost like a heartbeat. It felt alive, pulsating with an energy that made her uneasy. Unable to sleep, she found herself drawn to the clock again, the shopkeeper's warning playing in her mind. Compelled by curiosity, she turned the heavy brass key and wound it. The clock's hands began to move, and for a moment, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But when Holly looked outside, she realized the world had changed. The wind had stopped mid-whistle. Leaves hung frozen in the air. The sea, visible from her window, was a glassy expanse, its waves caught in an unnatural stillness. She ventured outside, finding everyone completely frozen in time. Her neighbors stood mid-conversation, their faces stuck in expressions of surprise and laughter. Cars were paused mid-turn, birds suspended in flight. Only Holly could move. At first, it was exhilarating. She wandered through the frozen streets, exploring places she'd never dared to enter. She took her time browsing the local bookshop, helped herself to treats from the bakery, and even ventured into the Grand Osborne house, normally teeming with tourists. But the novelty quickly wore off. By the third day, the silence was unbearable. The clock needed winding every 24 hours to maintain the frozen state, and Holly found herself debating whether to stop altogether. But when she tried, the clock's ticking grew louder, its hands moving in reverse until she wound it again. Then the whispers began. At first, Holly thought the whispers were a trick of her mind, a side effect of isolation. But they grew louder, distinct words forming sentences. "You should have left it alone. Time isn't yours to take. They're watching you." One night, while staring at the frozen face of her neighbor, Mr. Chapman, Holly noticed something horrifying. His eyes moved. They followed her, their pupils darting side to side in panic. He couldn't move his body, but his eyes begged for help. And he wasn't the only one. Throughout the town, subtle movements began. A twitching finger here, a trembling lip there. Frozen figures started to shift, their movements jerky and unnatural, like puppets on tangled strings. They began to turn towards her, their lifeless eyes locking onto hers. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the streets, now a cacophony of voices. "Fix it. Set us free. You took our time." Terrified, Holly fled back to her cottage. She tried smashing the clock, but the moment her hammer struck its glass, the clock rewound itself untouched and ticking louder than ever. Days turned into weeks. Holly was exhausted, her every waking moment filled with the haunting presence of the frozen townsfolk who now gathered outside her home. They stood in unnatural poses, their faces twisted in agony, their whispers louder with each passing hour. Desperate, Holly returned to Tempest Antiquities, but the shop was gone, replaced by an empty lot overgrown with weeds. She realized too late that the clock was not just a tool, it was a curse. It had stolen not just time, but life itself, feeding on the frozen moments it created. On the 31st day, Holly could take no more. She wound the clock one final time and let it run down completely. The moment it stopped ticking, darkness consumed her vision. When she awoke, she was standing in the middle of the street, frozen like the others. She could see, hear, and think, but her body was paralyzed. Across from her stood a young man, staring at the clock in her hands with the same curiosity she'd felt a month ago. A gaunt shopkeeper stepped out of the shadows. Beautiful, isn't it? The cycle began anew. The young man glanced up at the shopkeeper, then back at the clock in Holly's frozen hands. She wanted to scream, to warn him to leave it alone, but her lips wouldn't move, her voice wouldn't come. She could only watch as he nodded, his fascination mirroring her own from weeks ago. Holly's thoughts raced. Was this how it always ended? Was she now part of some eternal trap, a cursed legacy bound to ensnare others? She struggled against the invisible bonds holding her, but it was futile. The shopkeeper smiled, his expression predatory. "Take it," he urged the young man. The man hesitated. "How does it work?" "Simple, wind it, and time will be yours." When it returned, she was no longer standing in the street. She was inside a dim, cold room filled with countless faces frozen in agony, their glassy eyes reflecting faint light from the cursed clock, which now stood at the room's center. She realized with mounting dread that she wasn't just in the trap, she was part of the clock's inner workings. The room felt alive with a thrumming energy, each heartbeat synchronized to the ticking of the clock. She could feel the other victims' anguish, their desperation echoing through her mind. Suddenly, the pendulum swung, and with it came a voice deep, resonant, and inhuman. "You wound me, and now you are mine." Outside, the young man stood with the clock, turning it over in his hands. "It's beautiful." His curiosity had already taken root, the shopkeeper watching with a knowing smile. From inside her prison, Holly could sense what was happening. Her essence, now fused with the clock, screamed silently, her cries joining the thousands of other trapped souls. She felt the clock winding itself, pulling her deeper into its void. The young man inserted the key and wound it once. Time froze again on the Isle of Wight. Holly, now part of the clock's power, felt the familiar stillness blanket the island. She could feel the man's movements as he explored the frozen world, the same excitement she had felt when she first discovered its power. But she knew how quickly that excitement would turn to horror. The whispers would come for him. The frozen townsfolk would begin to move. And when he finally realized the cost of his newfound power, it would be far too late. As the clock ticked on, Holly's consciousness ebbed and flowed, caught in an endless cycle of torment. Somewhere, deep in the void, she vowed to fight, to break free. But she could feel the clocks were pressing down on her, ancient and unyielding. Time would claim another victim. The cycle would continue. And the cursed clock would never stop. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.